Hello everyone, welcome back to the SN Studio for a review of the Siege of Cthonia campaign book for the Horus Heresy game. It is absolutely monstrous. What a book. Now, before we get going, I want to say a big thank you to Games Workshop for sending us an advanced copy so that we can kind of get to grips on some of the rules and general theme of the book itself to share with you guys. Now, before I get stuck into things, I want to mention that what we're going to be doing here at SN is starting off an actual campaign for the Siege of Cthonia, and we'll be starting that on SN+. If you don't know what SN+ is, it is our membership service. You can see a join button below, or it is in the description, and we provide extra Horus Heresy content and other content, as you can see in our tiers, for our members. And those members support us in turn, allowing us to do these kind of videos, produce the kind of reports we do. Without them, the lights wouldn't be on, we wouldn't have what we have here. So huge thank you to them. So consider supporting if you enjoy the content we do. Like I said, what we will be doing is setting up the campaign in SN Plus to start, and then building up slowly as time goes on. But we want to try and spend a lot of time on this book because it looks like a lot of fun. Now, I'm going to be breaking this down into several parts. I don't have time, unfortunately, to go into a lot of detail on this book. As I mentioned, it is a monster of a book. I think it's maybe under 300 pages long. It's around 200, 270 odd. A lot of it is lore as well, which you'll be very happy with for those lore fanatics. I've just touched the tip of the iceberg, shall we say, in terms of reading in getting to know all the details of this. And honestly, it is drenched in history of Cthonia and everything else. So I'm going to be breaking it down into the general lore, just an overview. I'll start off that off. Then we're going to go into some of the campaign rules. And in terms of Zone Mortalis, I'll be doing a separate video with Mr. Pardo on Zone Mortalis itself, because they've got some all new rules and all new bits and pieces, which looks pretty exciting. So let us begin. I'm going to quickly dip into the lore. As I mentioned, the Siege of Cthonia itself has now a huge amount of detail that goes into it. The book itself talks about Cthonia and its history throughout the Horus Heresy. The book, as part of the Siege of Cthonia, is talking about the latter part of the Horus Heresy itself. So as Horus is in ascendancy with the traitor legions marching their way to Terra, splinter groups of the Sons of Horus want to reclaim their homeworld of Cthonia, which is currently under the rule of the Imperial Fists. It's not strategically important. Horus doesn't particularly care about Cthonia. He has bigger plans, hence the Golden Throne and toppling the Emperor himself. But a lot of what they're called in the book as the true Sons of Cthonia are dedicated probably just through passion and pride, rather than any kind of strategic sense, to reclaim Cthonia from the Imperial Fists, which are currently garrisoning the planet and blockading it from the fleet on top of that. So, as I mentioned, a lot of lore steeped in that area. It's said to be almost an unforgotten part of the heresy, in the sense that it was dwarfed by the Siege of Terra itself, but no less bitter and bloody. And I've been enjoying the stuff I've been reading so far. Now, one of the elements of the lore that is going into the gameplay is the new Inductii. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Could be Inductii, but it's Inductii. It's I think it's a play on the Roman, kind of ancient Roman terminologies. Now, Inductii are essentially Space Marine fodder. That's the best way to describe them. They are Space Marines that, due to the horrendous losses that the legions, both loyalist and traitor, received over the course of the Galactic Civil War, they needed to replenish their ranks, and they needed to find formats and formulations in which to do that in rapid time. This has meant that most of the legions brought in new Space Marine inductees that were, let's say, rapidly produced and hypno-indoctrinated to follow the certain doctrines and beliefs of the particular legions. Now, these inductii came with a host of different complications due to their kind of rushed nature in being produced. and in doing so, they were probably not as combat effective as their true, quote-unquote, Astartes brethren, but they still performed a vital part of the war itself, and a lot of the legions, if not all of them, ended up using Inductii as part of it. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of lore on the Inductii in the book, in each individual legion as well, but the important part is it has given us a new template in which to add to our existing force organization chart armies that unlock certain units and certain abilities to have Inductii. So with that, they get special abilities. So I'll give you an example. Certain legions can have certain units, so for example, tactical marines or despoiler squads, and they become Inductii. They change some of their unit types to Inductii, and they get certain benefits for that. Now, an example of that, for being a Word Bearers fan, there is one called Empty Vessels, where the Inductii of the Word Bearers have scarred their bodies with runes, and the Word Bearers' use of the dark powers to enhance their warriors has meant that they get the Empty Vessels special rule, which means that if they are not corrupted units, but they manage to kill enemy units, I believe if it's kill an enemy warlord, then they become corrupted and gain, maybe it's Furious Charge special rules. It's a lot to remember in my head, folks. But it's something like that. So essentially what you would do is pick I think it's a despoiler squad for the Word Bearers. That would be a unit that you can turn into an Inductii unit. And then in the back of the book, there is a host for every legion, has a specific template you can add to have Inductii troops, which I really like. It adds a real nice thematic flavor element. And I believe you can use this generally, as opposed to not just with the Siege of Cthonia itself. So with that, let's look into some more of the general rules you get, and that's coming up next. So with the Siege of Cthonia, you get some additional rules for the forces that are present there, primarily the Sons of Horus and the Imperial Fists. Now, before we get into those, there is also a unaligned generic upgrade or set of upgrades called the Decurion, which essentially is upgrades you can do to vehicles, and those vehicles then get access to advanced reactions. So these Decurion upgrades can be, say, 20 points, 30 points, and they do things like allow for extra shots on your pintle-mounted weapons, or you're allowed to, for example, in one advanced reaction, fire back against other vehicles using that advanced reaction. So it's nice that they've added a little bit more flavor and detail. The point of it is essentially meant to be like veteran-type crews or commanded particular tanks and things that are highly commanded by the troops inside, and they get extra benefits for doing so to point costs. So the Decurion adds a little bit of flavor to your vehicles, which is really nice. I like that. Then, of course, when it comes to the Sons of Horus and the Imperial Fists, you have the Sons of Horus have extra warlord traits and extra weapons, and so does the Imperial Fist, which you can use during the Siege of Cthonia. Now, I picked out two of my favorites. First of all, the Cast in Gold Warlord trait, which is probably one of my favorite warlord traits I've seen so far for the Sons of Horus. Cast in Gold, of course, because the Sons of Horus dip the skulls of worthy foes in gold to, I guess, cement them in time and also wear them as badges of honor for the difficult foes that they've defeated. Now, what this warlord trait does is if you end up fighting a character that has a weapon skill higher or the same as your own warlord, then you get +1 strength and +1 attack. Then, additionally, if you're able to defeat that enemy warlord, I believe, it could be character or warlord, then you gain a victory point on top of that, which I absolutely love. The idea that you're taking that skull, dipping it in gold, probably later on after the battle, but you get a victory point for doing so, and you get a buff at the same time. I absolutely love that. Then for the Imperial Fists, there's one called Unforgiven, which is loyalist only. And the Unforgiven is essentially instant death against things like, any rule of instant death when you're fighting big units like Knights or Primarchs or various other things. There's a list in there in the Warlord trait. Then the instant death special rule that they potentially have, something has instant death or provides instant death against your Warlord, that is changed to just D3 wounds. So it stops the one hit, one death, which is really cool. Additionally, him and his unit in there has to charge anything within 12 inches because I guess he's just very angry about not forgiving any of the traitors. But additionally, when locked in combat then against enemy units, that unit and the warlord gains the fearless rule. So he becomes quite strong, being unforgiven there. So that is some of the unit templates you can get. So the Dracurian, or Decurian, I should say, upgrades there, and upgrades for the Sons of Horus, and upgrades for the Imperial Fists. Extra weapons, extra warlord traits, and additionally, as I mentioned earlier, the Inductii, the templates you get, then they are for every legion. So there's one for each of them, because this book is both optional in terms of the Siege of Cthonia, but I'll go into the campaign stuff in a moment. But essentially, it means that you can play it using other armies that you want, because they want obviously to be very open and playable for all people that don't collect perhaps Sons of Horus or Imperial Fists. There are other legions that are engaged in the war. For example, there's some Thousand Sun Loyalists knocking around. I believe there's some Raven Guard knocking around, part of the Shattered Legions. Word Bearers are also present. And also the Militia, both Traitor and Loyalist. So there's plenty to go around, but additionally they want it to be quite open, as I mentioned, so people can play it regardless of their legion choices. Hence the Inductii, I think, is quite a flat overall template that you can use for your armies going forward. So it's, yeah, I quite like it. Now, moving on, let us dip into some of the campaign-related stuff, and that's coming up next. So here we are, the campaign element of the Siege of Cthonia book. Now, before we get into it, I want to explain that you can either play the Siege of Cthonia campaign, or you can play it as a generic campaign. So it's utilized for either or. So you and your friends can use this as a template to play a generic Horus Heresy campaign. It doesn't necessarily need to be the Siege of Cthonia itself. Now, saying that, the way it operates is that you and your friends pick sides, pick a team, pick factions, and then you decide on a battle. There are a selection of core missions in this, much like the Age of Darkness rulebook, very similar. And then additionally, there are some apex missions, which are not match play based. They are more narratively driven, which is explained in the book. And they have special scenarios and special details within it and how you play them, with extra kind of, there's like Hulk drop pod things and mines and all sorts, bastions and bits and pieces within. Now, within the Onslaught campaign, the way it operates is that once you play a game, there is a outcome, of course, a winner and a loser. And then what you do is you do a seize the moment roll. So let's say, for example, myself and Mr. Pardo are playing Word Bearers versus Ultramarines, just a generic battle. Then the Word Bearers, obviously, would win. I would make a seize the moment roll. Then there's a chart within the book, depending on how many victories I have during the campaign, how many victories you have during the campaign, and that roll then determines on a d6 whether or not we play the decisive battle. Now, the decisive battle itself could be one of the apex missions from your choosing, which again are more narratively driven, or you can pick one of the core missions again to play it out as the last battle. Now, there are certain limitations within the decisive battle. That final battle, whoever wins it, regardless of how many wins you have or losses you have, is the overall winner of the campaign. You can play in teams, so it doesn't have to be just two players. You can play multiple teams, but once all the players have played, for example, the first game, then you kind of go back and forth on the wins and losses and roll for that decisive battle. Now, to get stuck into that campaign and have some additional flavor added in, you have something called stratagems. But don't panic, they're not stratagems like in 40k. They are essentially pre-game options that you can take that allows your certain armies to utilize different benefits within the battle before it begins. So for example, there's one called No Surrender. No Surrender, essentially, if you play it before the game, you initiate a final game turn, an additional one on top of the existing, according to the mission rules you are playing. And in doing so, all of the units of the person that used that stratagem, and it's, I believe, pre-game, so you use it before saying, hey, I'm going to use this during the game. It adds an extra turn, and then additionally, all your forces become fearless for that turn. So it's a bit of a last effort, as it were, to rout the enemy in your favor. Then another stratagem could be something like Big Guns Never Tire, which is allowing something simple like an extra heavy support choice to be taken during that battle. So it's little flavorful moments of stratagems that you could add into there. And I don't believe you can duplicate stratagems. It could even be one stratagem per game each. I'd have to check that one though. But the use of stratagems in it just adds a little bit of flavor, and there's a whole bunch of generic stratagems you can use within it. On top of that, there are some additional rules for the Siege of Cthonia itself. And a nice part of this book is that a lot of these things are optional. You discuss with your opponent or the players of the campaign beforehand what you want to use and what you don't want to use. So an example would be that in the Siege of Cthonia, you have abilities that favor the Sons of Horus and abilities that favor the Imperial Fists. If you want to play it as the Siege of Cthonia campaign, those additional rules are, for example, that the seize the initiative on the game itself for the Sons of Horus, because they understand the layout of Cthonia in and out, all of the underground, etc. I think it's called Ancient Ground. Then they will gain a benefit to their siege initiative roll. And then there are other elements in it that, for example, there are additional stratagems specifically for the Sons of Horus and Imperial Fists. And one of those could be something along the lines of the Imperial Fists can bring a fortified wall with them. So they can bring walls, classic Imperial Fists, they can bring walls of fortified goodness onto the battlefield with them to support. So it's a little, again, adding flavor elements to that to bring in the Siege of Cthonia to life. Now, as I mentioned there, you have the Apex missions. You can play them as standalone as well, or you can play any of the missions standalone, I guess, but they can be part of the generic campaign if you so choose. But it says in the book that they should be kind of considered as the decisive battle ones there. So that is a little look into the world of the campaigns and how they operate. As I mentioned, they have stratagems, you have additional rules. Oh, and additionally, there are extra secondaries. So the secondaries count in every mission. And on top of that, you have things like Giant Killer. So you get victory points for killing, knights and titans and other big monsters on the battlefield. And additionally, there are things like the number of losses you take, and similar to the Age of Darkness book, but they are in effect in every game during the campaign. And one of the very cool elements within it, within the campaign book, is that your characters, much like things like Necromunda, you can take casualties of your unique characters. So if you have a particular Praetor, like mine, Lord Damien Pedley of the Word Bearers Legion, if they are a casualty during the game, you take a roll, and that roll determines what happens. Now, it could be a buff. They could get one vengeance for what happened to them, or they could end up dying during the game, or they get shaken or wounded, etc. There is a chart which you roll for during the campaign, which I absolutely love. Elements like that always create great fluff and flavor during the campaign, especially. And if you want to get that vengeance roll and go out and take claims of the enemy, I love it. It's brilliant. And last but not least, you have some additional units. I forgot to mention, of course, the Imperial Fist special character and the Sons of Horus, which we've all seen on the Warhammer community pages. They are additionally in there. So it's quite the book. There's a lot going on. I have merely scratched the surface, giving you an overview, but I am very excited. It looks a little bit overwhelming at first, but once you kind of pick away at certain elements, you can see that it's quite linear. Now, as I mentioned, the Zone Mortalis rule set is also in there. I will be going through that with Mr. Pardo soon. You will see a video of that additionally. So if you're a Zone Mortalis fan, yes, finally we have some new rules. It's not just the one mission anymore that you have to keep playing over and over again, with some actually interesting developments into the Zone Mortalis, including some changes to the core rules of how to play a Zone Mortalis game, which is very interesting. Now, if you are interested to discuss this further, as I mentioned, we have SN Plus, where we will have extra content on our channel. But additionally, we also have our Discord. The link is in the description below. Please come and join us, where you will be able to talk about all these things with us and the team and other members regarding the Siege of Cthonia, because, as I mentioned, we are going to be getting involved into this for quite some time. We're going to get stuck into the missions, stuck into the gameplay, and I cannot wait. Hope you enjoyed this little segment of the Siege of Cthonia overview or review. We shall see you on the battlefield very, very soon. Thank you for your time. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment below, and let us know what you're going to be doing with the Siege of Cthonia. Until next time.